Penguin Random House Audio presents The Last Soldiers of the Cold War, The Story of the Cuban Five, by Fernando Morais, translated by Robert Ballantyne with Alex Olegnowitz. Read for you by René Ruiz. To Elena and Clarice, The Light of My Eyes. Chapter 1. Veteran of the Angolan War, René steals a plane in Cuba, lands in Miami, and receives a hero's welcome. It was really hot in Havana in that late autumn of 1990. Nature's only blessing at that time of the year is that nightfall comes early, before 6 o'clock in the evening, sweeping the city with a fresh Caribbean breeze. It was a Saturday, December 8th, 1990, she would never forget the date. And Olga had decided to spend her day off catching up on work at the Tenerias Habana, the state company where she worked as an engineer. Around 7 o'clock on that overcast night, she got off the bus on tree-lined Fifth Avenue and walked a block to the modest apartment where she lived with her husband, René, and daughter, Irmita, in the once elegant neighborhood of Miramar, half an hour from the capital's center. As they left home late that morning, Olga had suggested to René that the 6-year-old girl spend the day with her grandmother, freeing the parents to see the Brazilian film Estelina, directed by Miguel de Faria Jr., which was opening the Latin American Film Festival at the Yara Cinema downtown that evening. Back home, Olga noticed that the apartment lights were out. René was late, and the film festival would have to wait for another day. Inside, with the lights on, she saw that Dandy, her daughter's dog, had chewed up a pile of old newspapers, spreading bits of paper all over the place. When she went to the kitchen to get a broom, she heard the neighbor's voice. "Look, the lights have come on. She's back." Seconds later, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, she came face to face with 2 solemn-looking men. "Are you Olga Salanueva, René Gonzalez's wife? May we come in?" Her reaction was immediate. Her husband, a pilot and parachute instructor, had had an accident. What else could it be? The man tried to calm her down. "We're from the Ministry of the Interior. Please sit down. We'll explain everything." "Explain what? My husband! What's happened to my husband? Is he injured? Is he alive?" "You knew your husband was going to fly today?" "Yes, I knew. What happened to him?" The answer, she would remember later, was like a blow to the head. "Your husband has defected." "René?" "Unbelievable. René is a veteran of Angola, a party militant. Where did you get this idea?" "René stole an airplane from San Nicolas Airport and fled to Miami." "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is an insult." Despite her distress, the man went on dryly, unflappable. "Do you have a radio? If you do, switch on Radio Martí." Olga's tiny battery-operated radio could tune in on shortwave to Radio Martí, a station created in May 1985 by American President Ronald Reagan to broadcast anti-Castro propaganda to the Cuban public. With her heart racing, Olga heard her husband's crystal-clear voice spreading through the house in an interview that had been broadcast over and over all afternoon. "I had to flee. In Cuba, there's a shortage of electricity, a shortage of food. Even potatoes and rice are rationed. The fuel for our planes is counted drop by drop." Olga's anguish was understandable. René, 34 and 6 feet tall, lean with a rough face, prominent nose, and faint shadows around his bright eyes, was a war hero decorated by the Cuban government. They made a handsome couple. Olga, a few inches shorter and 3 years younger than her husband, was an attractive woman with distinctive eyebrows, abundant hair, and a determined air. Apart from being workers' children, they had both been admitted a few months earlier into the Communist Party, where they were militants, and they shared a love of children and dogs. The main difference between them was that Olga was a true habanera on both sides, whereas René, an American citizen, had been born in Chicago. His father, Cándido, a metal worker and a card-carrying communist, had emigrated to Texas in 1952 in the hope of becoming a professional baseball player. At that time, baseball was the national sport of both Cuba and the United States. His cherished career as pitcher, however, would never go beyond the odd training session on the fields of the major league teams. Faced with the choice of going back to Cuba, where the repressive dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, 1933-59, awaited him, and trying his hand as a manual laborer, he chose the latter. He moved to Chicago, where he married Irma Seward, the granddaughter of Germans and the daughter of Cuban immigrants, with whom he had 2 sons. René was born in 1956 and Roberto in 1958. It was while living in Chicago that the family heard the news that Fidel Castro had put an end to the Batista dictatorship. In April 1961, after the attempt by the United States to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, Cándido decided that it was time to return to his native land with his wife and children. From that day until this, René had never again set foot in the country of his birth. When Olga met him in 1983, he was working as a flight instructor at various flying clubs around the country. Aged only 27, René was a veteran of the Angolan War, not unusual in Cuba, where more than 500,000 people, or 5% of the adult male population, had taken part in military missions abroad. But René stood out among the roughly 300,000 Cubans who fought on the side of the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA. The MPLA was backed by the USSR, which opposed the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, FNLA, and the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA. The FNLA was sponsored by the United States, China, and Zaire, and UNITA by South Africa. After 2 years in the jungles of Africa, where he performed 54 combat missions driving Soviet tanks armed with 120mm guns, René quit military service, but wore a medal officially designating him as an internationalist combatant by the government in Havana. December 8, 1990, started like any other day. René woke at 5 and ran 8 kilometers through Miramar's tree-lined avenues. Back home, an apartment so small that the only place to stretch and do some exercises was the tiny space by the side of the couple's bed. He took a cold shower, woke Olga, and together they shared a quick breakfast. They had little time for conversation. At 7 sharp, René had to catch the bus that took him and the other workers 50 kilometers to the San Nicolás de Bari Civil Airport, where he had been working for 2 years as an instructor. As they said goodbye, Olga reminded him of their evening engagement. "Don't be late, because we are going to the cinema at 8. "I'll be back at 6, don't worry." Still tormented by what she had heard on the radio, Olga didn't notice the men leaving. It didn't sound like a fake recording, nor did it seem that René had been forced to speak such nonsense. She switched off the radio and called her brother-in-law, Roberto, a lawyer who had also done his stint in Angola. Lacking the courage to give the news over the phone, she said only that something had happened with her husband and asked him to come over right away. Roberto was not alarmed. He knew his brother was an expert pilot and that the planes at San Nicolás were regularly overhauled, sometimes by René himself. The flying club's planes were so safe that if he wanted or needed to, the pilot could even cut off the engine in mid-flight, glide, and then land safely somewhere. At worst, he would have been forced to make an emergency landing. There was no need to worry. The calmness lasted only until he opened the door and found Olga, eyes swollen from crying. She hugged her brother-in-law. "René has defected, fled to Miami." He opened his eyes wide. "You're crazy. Who told you that?" "Listen to Radio Martí." She switched on the radio.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?